So just start out by taking a quick look about the differences between the old DJ2GO2 and the new DJ2GO2 Touch. And of course, it's really all about the touch on the jog wheels. That's the big thing, but also a couple of other subtle differences that I find. First of all, it's the actual plastic knob on the fader. The new one is much better for scratching, which of course is the idea of the touch jog wheels. Then the old one was had a little bit of a weird shape for a crossfader here. And also I noticed that the knobs up here, the 4 knobs, for specifically the levels maybe, are a little bit easier to turn on the new one than they were on the old one down here. So that's really nice because I found them to be a little bit harder to turn for switch of fast mixing using the knobs where you usually use up faders maybe. So those were the only actual physical differences that I could find on the two units. So remapping is really all about compromise, because of course all these knobs and buttons on this controller are already mapped to something in Virtual DJ out of the box, and the mapping is really good actually. It's how you would expect it to be, but I just wanted to do something different. So since they already do stuff, all of them, then of course when I start remapping, I'll lose something. So that's the compromise. So what have I decided to lose? Well, I've decided to lose the crossfader. So I don't intend to use the crossfader except when I'm scratching. So when I'm not scratching, then I don't want the crossfader to be active. I want to use that for something else. Then there's going to be no manual pitch. So these is going to be used for something else, mainly because they're so short. So I can't really use them for beat matching or for actually manually doing the pitch anyway. They're not precise enough for that. So I'll mostly rely on sync for that, and maybe a couple of buttons to help it. And then there's going to be no track unload. So the hold feature on the 2 load buttons, I'm going to remove those and remap those. So no track unload. Doesn't really matter. I never use that anyway. And then there's actually 2 kind of loops in this. There's auto loop and there's manual loop. And that's a little bit much when you just see so few actual buttons. So that's a little bit overkill. So I'm going to remove one of them. I've decided to remove the auto loop and only keep the manual loop, but you could go the other way as well. And then finally, there's going to be no sampler function. So if I want to use the sampler, I have to do it on the keyboard because I'm going to also remap that. So that's basically what we're going to lose out of all the stuff this controller can do out of the box. So what am I then going to add when doing this remapping? Well, quite a few things actually. So first of all, the pitch sliders. I'm going to turn that into a filter, so I can actually use those for controlling filter while mixing. And since filter is also the knob for sound color effects, then it'll also work as a sound color effects when a sound color effect is chosen. And since I don't want to do unload anymore on these buttons, then I'm going to turn the hold feature on those into change buttons for the sound color effects. Then the sync button has no hold function. And since I wanted the vinyl mode on off, I'm going to map the sync button's hold function to vinyl mode on off. And then there's a crossfader. I'm not going to have that as a crossfader except when I'm in scratch mode, which means when I'm in vinyl mode. And if I'm not in vinyl mode, then I'm going to use it for cue, pre-fade listen. So going back and forth between the track and selecting whatever goes into my headphones, except when vinyl mode is selected, then I'm gonna have it actually be the crossfader for scratching and also set the scratch curve when used. Then I'm gonna use the 2 PFL buttons. I don't need those anymore because that's down here now. So I'm gonna set those to pitch reset. That's a little bit frowned upon to use that function, but I use it quite a lot. So that's what I'm gonna add to those. And then all the rest is actually on the pads. So the pad has pad section has actually 4 modes here. It's kind of hardwired, so I'm gonna keep the 4 modes and then just change 2 of them. The hot cue one and the manual loop I'm gonna keep, but the auto loop is instead gonna be the auto effects. So it's gonna be the drops and the outs. So some of the auto mix effects with the drop mix that I've talked about. And then down on the second part here, it's going to be the 2 outs, so like a loop out and an echo out down here. And then if I turn it into, so that one, the sampler mode, that's like my my final little page. I'm gonna put the pitch lock on there on one of the buttons, so I can do some more creative mixing. Then I'm gonna put a toggle on the second one, so I can actually go between these handling filter and handling the low EQ. And then there are 2 more buttons left, and I'm gonna add pitch adjust on those, so a little bit up and a little bit down in BPM, so I can actually still do something if sync for some reason doesn't make the correct decision when trying to align the tracks, because as you remember, this will not be used for pitch anymore. So that's actually what I'm gonna do. So what does that look like in script? So the scripting needed has actually been done on 2 separate places. First one being on the actual controller, and the second one being on pad pages. So if we look at the controller one first, go into controllers, pick my DJ2GO2 Touch, and I have a mapping called Remapped. So what have I actually done in here? Well, a few things. We go through them alphabetically. You see the first thing I've remapped is the crossfader. So the crossfader is no longer necessarily just a crossfader, because it actually checks if one of the decks is in vinyl mode. If not, then it is the headphone crossfader instead. So I basically controls the headphones. And it also, in that case, makes sure the crossfader is in the middle, so that the system still works, in effect taking the regular crossfader out of function. And if one of the 2 decks is actually in vinyl mode, it'll be the crossfader, regular crossfader, so that it's ready for scratching. So the next thing I've changed is actually the LEDs for pad modes, and also the regular pad modes. So if we go down to the pad modes, you can see that the pad mode for Q is the same, but the pad mode for loop now calls a new pad page called Go Auto, and a pad mode for sample now calls a new pad page called Go etc. So those are 2 new pad pages that I'll get back to in a second. So that's how to get to know new functionality there. Moving back a little bit, you can see that we also now have a new function on new script on load. So if I hold the load buttons, it'll actually select a new color effects simply by going to the next one. And if it's not holding, if it's just regular click, it'll still load. And then moving back down here again, we have the pitch sliders. So the pitch sliders now actually validate if a new variable called low filter is set. If so, it'll work as the EQ low, and if not, it'll work as the filter. Then there's the PFL mapping up here, and that's actually the 2 headphone buttons that now does pitch reset when you click them instead of controlling the headphones. And finally, in here, the sync button now has a holding feature which switches the deck into vinyl mode. So those were the mappings done on the controller itself. Then moving on to the 2 new pad pages, you can see here's the first one called Go Auto. And the first pad page here is a Mobius up effect. So what it does is a bit complicated. I made a separate video on that a while back, but it basically does a Mobius effect while you hold the button, and when you let it go, it shuts down the Mobius effect and does the mix in an instant. So it mixes to the other deck when you release the button. Then the second button is the same thing, only with a little bit different Mobius effect, and also the Mobius effect going in the direction. Other than that, it's the same kind of thing. So an auto mix using Mobius. The third button on the Go Auto page is loop out. So this is basically my own kind of little loop out that that basically does what you will expect a loop out to do. And then the fourth button is an echo out. So it uses a regular echo and does a regular an echo out, and then it puts a little bit of break on top of it, so you get kind of a combined echo and break when you use it. Then there's the Go Stature pad page, and that also has 4 buttons defined. So the first one is pitch lock, so that you can lock the pitch on the 2 decks together. The second one here is the toggle for low filter, so you can change the slider, the pitch slider, between being a filter and being a low EQ. The third button is just a little bit tiny adjust of the pitch, going down 0.1 BPM, and the fourth one is going up 0.1 BPM. This is for if you need to adjust the pitch a little bit if the sync doesn't fully work. You can of course use other values here if you want to do bigger steps. So what's it then like in use with all these new remappings? Well, we should probably start with the touch feature, because that's a new thing on this controller compared to the old one. So what happens if I use the touch feature? Well, it does something, but actually because I'm not playing the track, it does the same as always. So it's really about when the track is playing. So if I play the track, it doesn't really do much because I'm not in vinyl mode. That also means that my crossfader doesn't really do much, at least regarding the master output, because that was now the PFL. So if I then turn down the master and turn up the Q instead and play, so that you now hear my headphones, you can see it definitely does something now on the crossfader. It simply handles what is output to the headphones, as we told it to. So that's great news. But we also wanted to do vinyl mode, of course. That was what the control was all about. So if I turn the master volume back up, Q down a little bit, and I tell one of the decks to be in vinyl mode, that was done by holding the sync button, as you might recall. So I pick the right deck in vinyl mode now. Then if I turn this all the way to the opposite side, then you can't hear this deck, but I can cut it in, and if I want to, I can also scratch it and cut that in and out. Like that. So when I go into vinyl mode, not only does the touch sensitive platters come into play, the crossfader also goes back to being a crossfader. Then there were the pitch faders here. We also remap those, so those are no longer pitch, they're instead the filter. So if I play a track, that is now the filter. Like that. And then, of course, being the filter, it can also control sound effects. So if I change the sound effect away from being filter, like maybe into noise, then it controls noise. We can maybe also try loop roll. Like that. And maybe finally just test echo, because that's probably the most used one. So like that. Pretty good for mixing. But we also did something on the sampler pad page, which is now the etc. pad page. That now also has a button for low versus filter, so low EQ. So if I change that here, then I switch this into actually handle the EQ for the bass EQ or for the low EQ. So when we play the track, I can cut the bass like that, which is also great for mixing. Pitch reset take 2. Then there was the pitch reset. That was actually mapped on the 2 PFL buttons because we now have PFL down here, so we don't need those. So if I have a track that has become very slow because maybe you synced it to another track, in this case it's 7.5 below, so I play the track again, and I want to bring it back, I can now simply click the pitch reset button on the deck. And it slowly brings it back to 0.0%, and then it turns out the LED because it's there, like that. So another thing I can do with the pitch reset is using it together with the pitch lock that we put on the first button here. So if I play another track over here that's slower and synchronize my faster track to that one and start it like that, then I can enable pitch lock like that, and then I can bring them back to the 116 BPM on the left side together like this. And now they're both back to 0% on the left side speed, and I can of course mix out of this if I want to. So that was pitch lock and pitch reset together, and I can turn it off again. The final 2 buttons on the etc. page was actually a pitch plus and minus. So if the sync hasn't gone perfectly, I can actually change the pitch slowly by using these 2 buttons. So came pitch down here. And back up. So that's just to do some fine adjustment if needed, because we don't have a pitch slider anymore, because that's used for other purposes. Then finally there was the auto pad page. That's not auto loop anymore, that's auto other things. So if I go to that pad page like that, I have my pad page selected. So now the 2 first buttons is auto mixes by adding a little effect on top. So if I play a track and the other track is also ready and turned up, then I can do something like this. So do a mix like that. Or if I start again, there's another variation. Like that. The final 2 buttons are out. So this one is loop out and this one is echo out plus break. So that'll be something like this. And the other one is like this. So a little bit more chaos-like. So that's basically all the remappings shown here, and I hope that gives you some inspiration to how you can remap if you want some of these features and can live without some of the default features. And of course, all the scripts used will be in the video description, and there'll also be a link to the actual 2 pad pages I created, and also to the complete XML for the mapping, so you can load it and try it yourself.